Thank you to this episode's sponsor. And now, without further ado, here is my conversation with Brad Faxon. All right, everyone, I'd like to welcome Brad Faxon onto the podcast. Brad, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. You're looking forward to it, Jordan.
Absolutely. So, Brad, I'd like to start off. In the introduction of this podcast, I spoke a little bit about what you've done in the sport, but I'd like to go back to the origin of your start in golf. Generally, some people can pinpoint an individual that got them into the game or a way that the avenue, if you will, that someone found the sport of golf. Can you pinpoint that for you?
Absolutely. I had a golfing family. My dad was a good player, a club champion. His brother and sister were both raised by my grandfather to play golf, and they grew up playing on Cape Cod at a course called Woods Hole, and all of them were competitive statewide. My grandfather introduced caddy camps to I think a half a dozen courses on the Cape back in the Depression era. He was a good player himself, so I got introduced by my dad. My mom played a little bit, and I was fortunate enough, living in Barrington, to be in a town that has a great golf course. And like most kids in my day, I'm almost 60, I'm 59 now. I didn't get raised to be a professional golfer. I had opportunities to play other sports. I played baseball, I played hockey, I played kind of any sport that had a racket, and just never thought about it too seriously, but just was exposed to a lot of different things. And that combination of being in Rhode Island with a dad that loved sport really helped my golf.
I bet. And Rhode Island is not a state that you generally hear a lot of guys coming out of and going up on tour. So, you hear a lot of guys in Florida, Texas, California getting out on tour. But what was that environment like for competitive golf in the state of Rhode Island?
It's funny that I would say the impression most people have is you have to be brought up in warm weather on good golf courses, that you'd have to have a lot of money. But if you look over the course of history of some of the greatest players in the world, if you start with the Americans and Jack Nicklaus, he grew up in Ohio. Tom Watson grew up in Kansas City. Arnold Palmer was in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. So I think that back in that day, learning golf wasn't a year-round sport, or meant to be. There wasn't PGA Tour with money like we have now. So there was no such thing as early specialization. I think it was part of being a well-rounded kid. And then a lot of the other great players, Sam Snead, Ben Hogan, I mean, it wasn't a profession you could make a lot of money in. So people, Lee Trevino grew up with a stick, Seve Ballesteros, or a bottle top or something, hitting a bottle top. It's funny that I think people think that you can't be good at it just because you're from Rhode Island. And as a matter of fact, I'd argue that you can be better at it because of playing in not ideal conditions all the time. We played spring golf. You know how bad it is in New England in the spring, and we'd get a early April day that was 45 to 50 and think that it was nice.
Exactly.
Now, if it's living in Florida, if it's below 65, you don't go outside. So that was, I think, a perk of growing up in Rhode Island. And then, what's funny is Dana Quigley, Brett Quigley's uncle, was a guy that was a good locals professional golfer that got on the tour a little bit, played a few PGA Tour events. I caddied for him quite a bit. He caddied for my dad. So we saw a glimpse of a local guy that had made some marks on the PGA Tour. And I think he kind of, I always give him credit for like giving me the thought that maybe I could do this someday. So that helped too, to have somebody that you were around, you could feel and touch, that made it out there.
Sure. And I think something you brought up earlier about playing a bunch of different sports, which is something a lot of golfers do. When did golf, in your mind, emerge as the sport that you wanted to really pursue?
It's funny. I was playing, up into high school, I was playing baseball, hockey, and golf full time, and messing around with some squash, table tennis, and all different kinds of things, skiing a little bit. But I think once I got hit a couple too many times on the ice, you kind of hurts, or I don't know if I want to do that forever. And guys were getting bigger. Plus, I liked the idea of an individual sport. I liked being outside. It was a team sport for sure. But I started playing in some junior tournaments when I was about 13, 12, maybe 12 or 13. And I liked the kids I was hanging around with. My father loved the fact that he could drop me off at the golf course and I could spend the whole day there, and I couldn't get in trouble. So, and then if I wanted to play high school hockey, and I think I was good enough, that golf and hockey overlapped a little bit in the spring. Hockey, winter time went into the spring, and I couldn't have done both because the golf season was so short. I said, you know what, I'm just going to choose golf. And the story is pretty funny because when I was in ninth grade at Barrington High School, it was actually not in the high school building. Ninth grade was at the middle school building. And that particular year, 1976, it was the first time the state of Rhode Island allowed freshman athletes to play varsity sport.
Okay.
So our coach at Barrington High School, Don McGregor, forgot to put notices up in the ninth grade hallways. And that's all they could do was send out a sheet. And I showed up a day late for the qualifying because I never got the message. And he looked at me and he says, well, you're a freshman. And I said, well, we're allowed to play this year. And he goes, well, if you're going to play on this team, you got to play our number one man tomorrow. And this guy was like a 6'6" guy, senior named Chris Klein. And I'm like, well, that's not very fair, but I didn't have a choice. I played Chris Klein and I kind of drummed him pretty badly, just a match play. And I got back, told the coach I beat him, and he said, well, you got to beat him again tomorrow. I was like, what? So I had to go back out there and play him again tomorrow. And the next day, and I beat him then and I made the team. So I got lucky but I thought that was funny that I even got that opportunity, because if I didn't happen to go up to the golf course on the qualifying day, I would have never known there was qualifying.
Absolutely. And I'm guessing throughout your time in Barrington, did you hone your skills in at that point? How was the coaching like?
So I was a guy that really never had many lessons. My dad was like a typical golfing dad, I guess. He said, keep your head down, eye on the ball, and practice a lot. And I learned back then by imitation, by watching pros on TV, and I caddied a lot. I worked in the locker room there. I treated golf as like a job in a way. I had to, and I liked being at the club because I was around people that were successful. They were nice to me, and just that environment was something I liked golf because it was social as well as competitive.
Sure. There's a lot of crossover there, and that's an appeal for many people. So you're in high school, you're enjoying golf, having some big victories over the tall kids on the team. And at what point is the college golf an image in your mind?
Yeah, good question. Probably my junior year in high school, when you start getting interested in going to colleges, I made the decision that I wanted to go south to play. My dad was actually toying with the idea of trying to put me in a high school in Florida. And I said, no, I've got a good high school team. I got a good base of friends. I didn't want to leave home. But I wanted to go to a good competitive school and have, opportunity to get a scholarship. And I guess the summer after my junior year is when I really started to play well, more on a national level than on a local level. I won the New England Amateur, had won the U.S. Juniors the state juniors a few times, but competed and qualified in a few national events. And that was kind of, okay, that was my ticket to at least get noticed by some of the schools. And I knew if I went to the South, I'd at least play against the best competition.
Sure. And when did you end up making your selection?
Yeah, so I had applied to a bunch of schools like Wake Forest, North Carolina. Georgia was a good school. And my grandfather, who I told you about earlier, he had a place down in Sea Island, Georgia, and his next door neighbor was the guy that was the head of development for Furman University, which I had never heard of. And it wouldn't have been on my radar screen except for I was playing one that summer in the Insurance Youth Classic, which was a national junior tournament. And I happened to see a coach with a Furman shirt on, the coach named Gary Meredith. I walked up to him. I said, "Hey, coach, my name's Brad Faxon. My grandfather knows so-and-so from Furman. I'm interested in your school." And he was like, "You're from Rhode Island. You'll never make my team." And it's funny. That's where I applied to. I got in. I got accepted with a $400 a year scholarship. I think back then tuition was like $13,000. So, I mean, back then it was a marginal scholarship at best, but it gave me a place to go. It had a good academic reputation. Small school, but a great schedule. We were playing against all those top teams. So I knew I'd get to play right away. And it turned out to be a really, really good choice to go there.
Sure. That certainly seems to be the case, at least. And you talk about, I've heard a lot of people talk about that transition from high school into collegiate golf, because not only is it transitional in terms of the way you're living, you're away from home, learning more about yourself, but you're also playing entirely different golf. And as you said, entirely different competition. So was that transition for you a rude awakening, or was it fairly easy for you?
I never thought of it as a rude awakening. I mean, what the culture of it was different. Going to South Carolina, I'd never seen chewing tobacco. I'd never heard of a hush puppy. I never heard of fried okra. I had never thought about being in a fraternity because I was really a nerd in Rhode Island. I didn't really have a big social life. I just played golf. That's all I did. I mean, I had a group of friends that all we did was think about golf, and academics were important. Both my parents wanted me to do well in school. So I studied. I told my daughter, who I told you she goes to SMU, I told her the other day that in my 4 years of school, I never missed a class for any reason at all. I was never sick, and all my classes were done by noon so that I could go play golf after class. And even there were a few days a week where I'd go get up early and go hit balls before I went to school. And she just, she can't get out of bed before 11 o'clock. I don't know how you do that. And it's just, it was a passion.
It has to be at that point for sure.
Right.
So you're playing obviously very different golf there too. When you're down south, you're not playing same courses. I'm guessing the structure is different, longer courses. How did that affect the way that you thought about your game?
Well, Furman's in Greenville, South Carolina, and like a lot of the courses in the South, it was built with Bermuda grasses versus a bent grass, or a lot of the local grasses we had up north were ryegrass or poana. So I had never seen Bermuda. I had never seen a golf course overseeded with ryegrass. Conditions were very, very different. Greens were much slower and bumpier than the nice greens we were used to. And I mean, that took some time to get adjusted to. I don't know that the courses down there were better. They were certainly different. I think I had a good background growing up in New England because, there's a lot of history to the golf courses, good architecture, but I learned in the weather in Rhode Island, maybe with bad conditions or not ideal conditions all the time, how to play in the wind, how to play in lies that weren't, just level lies all the time. And especially putting around the greens, learning, 3-4 footers where you had to put it outside the hole. It wasn't just hitting a straight putt all the time. And you had to learn how to putt at different paces. And, before I was a junior in high school, I was a smaller kid, so I didn't really bang it out there as far as most of the kids. And I learned if I wanted to compete with the older kids, I had to learn to chip and putt. So, it was kind of a perfect storm, really, of how to grow up where I grew up and how to compete. And then the luxury of being at the small school, Furman, was I made the team immediately as a freshman. I was the number 2 player. My first event, made honorable mention All-American as a freshman. And I still contend that it would have been nice to have a better team. We never really made it to the Nationals as a team, but I played against all the top players in this, certainly in the region. And then when we got to the bigger tournaments, against all those best players in the country.
Sure. There's a ton to be learned by that level of competition. So when you're in your later portions of your college career, what are your thoughts in terms of professional golf at that point?
When I first got into the pro shop at Furman University's golf course, there had been a few players on the team before me that had made honorable mention All-American or a second team All-American. And those plaques were posted on the wall kind of in the pro shop. And two of the players, David Strawn and Kenny Zell, were on those plaques. And I kept staring at these plaques, and every first team All-American player had made it on the PGA Tour, or at least played on the PGA Tour for some amount of time. And I thought, if I can be an All-American, I can be a PGA Tour player. So I didn't have as good of a sophomore year as I would have liked, maybe the sophomore jinx, but I made first team All-American my junior and senior year. And that gave me some luxury when I finally graduated and got turned professional in the spring of '83. I played on the Walker Cup team in Great Britain and Ireland. And then I played in the US Open at Oakmont in '83. And that's when I turned pro. After that, I signed with IMG, which was the biggest sports agency, golf sports agency going. And they got me some exemptions to play right away. So it couldn't have worked out any better. And I would definitely say that being at Furman gave me the opportunity to be an All-American, gave me the opportunity to get those exemptions, and then ultimately get my card right away.
Sure. So how many exemptions, do you remember how many exemptions you had at that point?
Right. So the rules back then, and they're pretty similar now, where if you weren't a member of the PGA Tour, and I obviously wasn't, you could only get 5 sponsors exemptions from the title sponsors. You were still allowed to go try and Monday qualify. Mm-hmm. So that summer I got 5 exemptions, and then I got into 3 other tournaments by going to do the Monday qualifyings. I did 1 in New York and 2 in Texas, which were they were pretty hard to do.
Those are
spots with, I don't know, 65, 70 guys, and you'd have to shoot 4, 5, 6, 7 under par, depending on and where you were. And it's funny, the last one I did, the Texas Open, was in San Antonio. And look, I'm a just turned 22-year-old. I was raw. I'm down there by myself. I'm renting a car. I don't know where I'm going, what I'm doing. And I wanted to, I had one caddy that was helping me to find other caddies. And there were a lot of guys that went week to week out then trying to find players. And this one guy named Seymour, he wanted to caddy for me. And he asked me, and I honestly didn't have a caddy at the time, but I didn't know whether he should caddy for me. I didn't know what to do. So I asked the guy I relied upon, whose name was Gypsy. Gypsy caddied for Jim Simons. And I said, what do you think? He goes, well, you don't want Seymour. I'll get you a guy. So he got me a guy. And when I got back from qualifying, all 4 of my tires were punctured in my rental car.
Oh boy.
Maybe Seymour's mad at me. Yeah, it was pretty bad.
And is there a level of stress in playing on the PGA Tour without that card, knowing that you don't have a ton of time to prove yourself and get that membership?
Well, I was kind of resigned to the fact that even with those exemptions that I was going to have to go through the Q school. I mean, there was a workaround that if you had played well enough or to make enough money to earn what the previous year's 125th guy made, you could get your temporary card. And I was close to it, but I still had to go through the tour school, which back then was, they had a regional and then a final qualifying. So you played 4 rounds regionally, then you played 6 rounds at the Players Championship course, which was a brand new course back in 1980 or so. And that's where we played our 6 rounds. And that was as much pressure as you could imagine playing under, having that for your livelihood, because if you don't make it, your only other options were travel around the world, mostly to Asia. There wasn't really an established European tour, or else you stay in Florida and play. I think they called it the Hooters Tour. It was kind of a mini tour, and those were not really, I don't think, conducive to playing great tour golf.
Sure. And that Q school process, many people, as you said, refer to it as one of the most grueling processes to get out on tour. How did you fare throughout the Q school?
It was a fun week. I had, I finished, there were, I don't know how many guys started there, 250 guys. They had 2 different cuts. I finished 13th out of the 50 that made it. I remember playing the last couple holes, and 7, all of them were wrought with peril. You had water on 16, 17, 18, the island green on 17. And it was, you're playing stroke play. So one swing was a bad swing, was a disaster. And I remember making my last swing and my tee shot on 18 going right down the middle. I'm like, that's the greatest shot I've ever hit. And knowing that night was it wasn't like a huge party, but it was huge relief and satisfaction knowing that for 1 year at least, I'd have my ability to play a full season on the PGA Tour. And by the way, I think if I had gone back 3 years when I was a sophomore in college, and if somebody said, hey, look, you're going to get out of college, you're going to qualify right away and play a year on the tour, that would have been satisfying enough to me. I never really thought I was going to be a PGA Tour winner or star. I mean, I wanted to get out there and just play golf and compete, but to be able to look back now and say, most people will say, oh, he was an overachiever, and I think I was an underachiever, which I think would be a good, a compliment on both sides of that.
Sure. And I think that's an interesting point you say about not expecting to be this star on tour. A lot of golfers, they're great golfers who show up on tour, but they don't necessarily feel a sense of belonging or a sense of being the man on that tour. So your rookie season, did you show up with a lot of confidence, or did you just try and find a way to find your own spot?
I was confident because, my senior year in college, I won the Haskins Award, which was the college golf equivalent of the Heisman Trophy. So I was the College Player of the Year. I had won a bunch of tournaments on that summer before college. I won on a national level. I won a bunch of tournaments in college, and I knew I could play, and I made the cut at the U.S. Open as an amateur. I was low amateur there, and making a bunch of cuts before I got my card, just proved to me that, look, I can do this. It's just a matter of how good can I get.
Sure. And that first year on tour was 1984, correct?
Yeah, exactly, 1984.
And you had a couple top 25s that year, top 10?
I had a top 10. I think the last tournament of the year was at Walt Disney World. I finished tied for third. I played with Payne Stewart and Roger Maltby in the last round. I made a big check. I remember to keep your card back then, you didn't need to make a ton of money. I think if you made $35,000 or $40,000 back then, you kept your card. In the last tournament, I got a check for $20,000 or $22,000. And I remember sitting at the, in the lunchroom or the dinner room after the round, and I'm trying to figure out how much do I pay my caddy. And I was using a guy that caddied a lot for Tom Kite back then. He was doing me a favor. And I sat with Mark Brooks, who had gotten through the Q school that year as well. He later won the PGA Championship at Valhalla. And I'm trying to figure out what to write this check for. We paid a salary and a percentage, and I remember giving him my pen, and he wrote the number down, what I should pay my caddy, and it was about $1,000 more than I thought I was going to pay the guy. I felt so good about it. I gave it to him, and we both hugged each other. It was like a pretty cool moment, writing checks, and now everything's, of course, wired or Venmo'd.
Exactly right, yeah.
That was a pretty cool memory, and I was a really, really slow player. That first year, and I had gotten fined once for slow play. I was working with a guy named Bob Rotella, who was a sports psychologist, and he was all about visualization and routine, and mine was painfully slow. And Roger Maltby got kind of mad because even though I played well and I think I finished ahead of him, I was really slow. And he kind of goes, "Hey, look, you're going to have to play faster than that." He was very nice about it, but I could tell he was irked.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of learning that happens just by showing up on that tour, I would assume. You keep your card. What are the next couple of years like on that tour? What are you working on in your game? Do you notice any shortcomings?
Yeah, I knew that I loved being out there, and I think I was really eager to improve, and I needed to improve in a lot of parts of my game. But I think my mistake was I thought it was a lot of technical stuff that I need to get better at in my golf swing. And like I said, I lived down in outside of Orlando and at Greenleaf, and David Ledbetter was a mentor. He was a friend. He was a coach. And I felt like every time I made a bogey, I would make a phone call. What do I do next? What do I do next? Instead of really kind of taking a deep breath, I was trying to back then be, perfect at everything. I was trying to be perfect with diet, perfect with exercise, perfect with, my golf swing, putting. And I don't think I think that was pretty common. I think a lot of players were like that, but it was a mistake that cost me because I almost lost my card my sophomore year. And I was very lucky because the top 125 money leaders kept their card and weren't eligible, and that eligible for the next year. And that year, I finished 125th on the money list, and I was playing so badly. I missed the last 5 cuts of the year. If I had to go back to tour school that fall, there's no chance I would have made it. No chance. So that was a big blessing. I missed those last 5 cuts, and then I started off in the year of '86 missing a bunch of cuts. And I was lost. I was really, really lost. And for some reason, I found something in the spring of '86 where I got a little bit better. Peter Costas, who was an instructor and an announcer, and he kind of gave me one little lesson that kind of propelled me and made me stop thinking about a million things. And that kind of got me back on the right track.
It's interesting that you talk about maybe focusing on the technical part too much, because what a lot of people, when they think of great golfers, they think of how in tune they are with their swing and their mechanics, which they are. But a lot of times these breakthroughs people have are very mentally based.
Yeah, I think that, and it gets harder now every year because there's more and more data available, the technologies that are out there for players to look at their swings in slow motion, all these launch monitors that they have, 3D kinematic sequences, all the things that players look at to improve. It's impressive, but you've got to be really cognizant of how much is too much, what can I handle, and think about while I'm playing, when do I do that? Do I do it during a week or a couple weeks off or a month off? And when you're a rookie and you see these great players next to you that are pounding golf balls, they seem to know what they're doing. You always kind of go, well, I got to do more than they do to get better. I can't let up. And that was one thing. The advice I give a lot of young players is, look, you have to have enough talent to get out here. Now, don't mess it up by trying to change too much at once. Just if you can be satisfied picking up just one thing, not 10 things.
It's heavily based on having confidence in yourself.
Yeah, confidence in yourself, confidence in the people that you go and ask questions about. And then, I mean, sounds like overly simplistic, but you have to love what you're doing. You have to realize that you're still playing a sport that you wanted to play as a kid. You wanted to play for fun. And sometimes you really get lost in this search to get better all the time. And that's definitely a challenge even today. I mean, when you walk out there on the range as a rookie and you're sitting next to Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy and Dustin Johnson, and all of a sudden you plop your golf bag down there and it doesn't have a name or a corporate logo. And,
Mm-hmm.
you're like, oh my gosh, how am I
Yeah.
going to beat these guys?
Mm-hmm. That's got to be a pretty daunting feeling. And we said that sophomore year, you struggle to keep your card. You do 125 on the money list. You continue to keep your card. And let's fast forward to the year of 89, where you have a pretty solid year.
Yeah, I was at the point where I was getting a moniker for being a journeyman. I was one of those guys that an okay player. I was a 60th to 100th on the money list sort of guy. I was a nice guy. I was a guy that could play but couldn't really finish it out. Wasn't known as a winner, and it was bugging me. I had been a guy that was like constantly searching to different instructors on how do I finally break through as a swing thing. And I chose to go on that path that I need to work on my swing. And it's funny, there was an instructor from Rhode Island named Dave Collins that used to work for Dana Quigley at Crestwood. And Dave Collins had settled in New York at a place called Sleepy Hollow where Jim McLean was an instructor. And that's where I ended up going to start working. And this must have been late 80s, 89 to 90 when I first met Jim. First started to have some instruction and kind of got some peace of mind that, okay, I got the right guy. I don't need to keep doing crazy stuff. And McLean had taught a lot of good players, a lot of great players. He had played the game at a high level. And I think we started a pretty good relationship that lasted pretty much throughout the 90s.
Sure. And so that 89 year, there are 2 runner-up finishes. You're talking about how you have this itch to win. And then in 91, it happens. You break through.
Yeah, I don't know that my memory is that good to remember what the 2 tournaments were in 89. You can tell me if you want. But yeah, 91 was what I would call my breakthrough year. I won a tournament in 86 that was actually opposite the US Open at Shinnecock. It was an official money event. So for a while it counted as an official tournament. The tour took that away, sadly. But in 91, Billy Andrade and I, we played a lot of golf together. He's 3 years younger than me, but he had won 2 tournaments in a row at the Kemper Open and the Westchester tournament. And I was like, gosh, we play all the time. I know he's not better than I am. I can play as good as Billy can. Why can't I break through? And it was July or August. I think it was in August when I won the Buick Open in Flint, Michigan, in a playoff over Chip Beck. I remember sitting over 5 or 6 footer and thinking, this putt is to change my life. Back then you think about when you win, the exempt status you get for a couple of years, getting in the Masters, getting in the Tournament of Champions. And it was just a miracle I could take the putter back. I remember like it was yesterday, how nervous I was, how I couldn't feel my hands. I didn't know if they'd work. And the putt went in so clean. That was a big moment. And that, I don't know, that didn't prove to me that I made it. That didn't prove to me much other than that I deserved to be out there and that all the hard work had paid off.
Absolutely. And then we follow up to 92, where you once more prove that, you're not some journeyman. This is, you're a contender out here.
Right. And the whole year of 92 was a great year for a lot of different reasons, but Jim McLean had spent a lot of time out in California when he was teaching in the winter months. And he had a place at La Costa where the Tournament of Champions was. We spent a lot of time working and setting goals for the next few years. I lost in a playoff that tournament, the first tournament of the year, to Steve Elkington, and ended up winning the International in Denver. And the Pleasant Valley tournament, the New England Classic, was at, place where I could stay at home, your local tournament. And those things mean a lot to a player, to win their official event, their home event. That was a really meaningful year. And, I lost, I think, another playoff at the Buick Open. Was it the Buick Open? Yeah, I think so. And I was getting, talked about for being potential Ryder Cup player. I was top 10 on the money list that year. And those were, and for me, making real money, I mean, that wasn't the reason why I would say I was playing, but I said, this is kind of cool. I mean, all these things are happening. I was sponsored by Titleist, which, was in my neighborhood growing up, all the Titleist execs, and a great relationship with them. So that was, I think, a really important part.
Well,
year for me.
It's interesting that you talked about the charity tournament, which I know has
and I
back
started
so
our
very
charity
much, and
tournament.
I've been there a bunch.
We were
it's
starting to be
tournament,
recognized not only as good players, but also
that
as
recognition
players that
for
gave
giving back to the sport with the Payne Steward Award. And that's an award that a lot of people, it's very revered in the sport of golf. So for you to receive that kind of honor, what does that mean to you?
Right. I think a lot of people forget or confuse that Billy and I, we had our own celebrity tournament before we did the CBS Charity Classic. We started something called the Andrew Faxon Charities for Children back in 91 and 92. And that's still going strong. We've raised, I don't know, $8 or $9 million for children's charities in the state. But the Payne Steward Award was something when Payne tragically passed away in 99, that they started this award. And it was based on a player's competitive ability, as well as their ability to how they've done with charity, how they worked with the media, how they worked with the fans. They use the word comportment, how they dressed and carried themselves. And the coolest thing about that for me was knowing that the previous award recipients from the Payne Steward Award were who voted on it. And, those previous players were Arnold, Jack, Tom Watson, Ben Crenshaw. And to know that they voted for me, I was like, holy smokes, this is a big, big deal.
Absolutely. It's definitely reflecting of, I think Zach Johnson was a recipient this year. It's whenever someone wins the Payne Steward Award, it's a very good recognition for someone who's done a ton for the sport.
It is. And in my speech that I gave, I said, look, this is an award that when it first came out, I thought this is an award that would be really cool to win. But I said in my speech, I said, imagine if this was something people tried to win, how good our tour would be if everybody, went after that as a goal as much as they did after a tournament title.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. But it certainly is becoming that way. I think, as I said earlier, it's when someone wins that, that they're doing something great for the sport. Now, Brad, I'd like to circle back to that 92 year. You talked about the Ryder Cup and being in consideration for that, and you ended up playing on 2 Ryder Cup teams. Now, the Ryder Cup is something that every golf fan adores, and the players love it too. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts and that experience for you playing on 2 teams.
Yeah, the Ryder Cup experience is second to none. I was close to making the team in 93. It was on the odd years every 2 years, and it was a point system that's changed over the years, but it was really based on 2 years of competition, and you could only earn points if you finished in the top 10 of a tournament. So it made you want to be competitive every week. And you could make the team by simply finishing 4th and 5th every week, and certainly wins would help a lot. 12 players made the team, 2 would get picked by the captain. And the greatest memory, I think, in my career was that the final round of the PGA in 1995 at Riviera, I had started that final round maybe in 20th place, 21st place. I was well back of the lead, 7 or 8 shots back of the lead with Colin Montgomery, Steve Elkington, Ernie Els, with not a really realistic chance to win. The scores were pretty low that week, but the course that I loved, and I knew that I had to finish in the top 10 on the Ryder Cup points list to make it. Lanny Watkins was the captain, and nobody had ever been picked outside of the top 10 as a rookie for a Ryder Cup. So I knew my last round was crucial, that I had to get in the top 10, and I probably had to move up a lot to get enough points to secure a spot. I was just outside was in 12th or 13th place in the Ryder Cup standings. And I just had a miracle round, and especially a miracle first 9 holes. I was playing with Jose Maria Olazabal, who was a 2-time Masters champion and one of the most competitive Ryder Cup players in the history of the game. And I eagled the first hole, par 5, and then it just seemed like every shot I hit that first 9 and every putt I hit went in the hole. And I made about a 30-footer for a birdie on the 9th hole to shoot 28, and that 28 is still a record of the lowest 9 holes ever shot in a major. And
Wow.
I don't know that it could ever be broken. I honestly don't know if anybody can shoot 27 in a major. You never know with all the things that are happening in this sport, but that was pretty neat. I walked off the 18th green having made about a 12-footer for a par on the last hole to shoot 63, which at the time was a record for the lowest round in a major, lowest round in a PGA, lowest final round. And it put me into 5th place in the championship and put me, I think, into maybe 8th place on the Ryder Cup list. I think I knocked Mark Calcavecchia out, and I think he still gives me crap about it. He's a good man, but it was just one of those rounds. I actually have the scorecard in my office, and I see it every day, reminding myself of what a day that was.
I bet. So you show up to the grounds on your first Ryder Cup. Is it just an entirely different ballgame for you?
Yeah, it's funny. People, I'm sure every pro gets asked the same questions, like what's it like to play in the Ryder Cup? What's the most nervous you've ever been? Do you get more nervous at the Masters or at the Ryder Cup? And my first official practice round at the Masters with the whole team there was a great story. We had played around at Oak Hill in Rochester on Monday of the tournament week with no spectators. They opened the gates on Tuesday, and we had hit a bunch of balls, and there had to be 40,000 people out there watching this practice round on a crisp fall day in Rochester, New York. And we walked, it was a pretty long walk from the practice range to the first tee. And my group was going to be with Corey Pavin, Peter Jacobson, and Lauren Roberts, who were all friends of mine, all good players. I think that Peter, I don't know if any of us had Ryder Cup experience before, but our captain, Lanny Watkins, told us we were going to go out and be the first practice round. So we're walking through this gauntlet of people. As we get to the first tee, people are yelling, screaming, waving American flags, screaming USA. Everybody's got red, white, and blue on. And we get up on the first tee, and standing there were President George Herbert Walker Bush and Byron Nelson, waving flags. They got red, white, and blue on, and I'm like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And this voice of God comes over the loudspeaker and says, next to play, or first to play from the United States of America, from Barrington, Rhode Island, Brad Faxon. And I had no idea I was going to be the first one to hit. And the place went crazy. This is practice round. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh my God, I felt so nervous and so out of place. And I just said, please get up in the air. Just go forward. And, I hit a decent tee shot, but we all laughed about how nervous that made us.
Absolutely.
It was really funny.
And then throughout the week, it's just got to be a different level of competitiveness, because we spoke earlier about the beauty of golf being the individualistic nature of it, but playing with a team, how does that affect the way that you enter that week?
Yeah, there was no other time where I felt as proud, to be on a team representing the country. I did that for the Walker Cup team in '83 as an amateur, but this was different with the amount of people that came out. We were the home team. The Ryder Cup had become very competitive starting in 1987. We lost after having won for years and years and years. So we needed to win this thing. We had lost the previous Ryder Cup, and I think a lot of times, people just congratulate you because you played on the Ryder Cup team. I played on that team. We lost by half a point, and then I played the following year in '95 in Spain. So we played an away game there and lost that by half a point. It was just incredible competition. I think the players were very fair to each other. There was no really hostility. We weren't really in social media driven world like we are now.
Sure.
And players, we had dinners afterwards. Everybody was very cordial, and it was really competitive. It was just the greatest memory I can say, having that. And I just, as I'm watching Freddie Couples just pour a putt, and he was my partner in both '95 and '97 in the first matches and we won both of those matches. And it was, I think, the best golf, as good a golf as I've ever played playing with him. He was such a really comfortable partner to play with.
One of the smoothest swings out there for sure.
It is.
So throughout the rest of your PGA Tour career, obviously winning a good few more times, finishing with 8 wins, and then once you're wrapping up on the PGA Tour, is there a thought in your mind about golf media and broadcasting, or how did that career path present itself to you?
I think that I always had a good relationship with the media. I knew I had taken some public speaking classes. I think I was always impressed by players that had a high Q rating. They might have been more well known off the course than they were on the course. Peter Jacobsen would have been one of those guys for sure, that would go out of the way to do extra things, go the extra mile. And I enjoyed the heck out of that. And when I did interviews with people, I could tell people liked, what I had to say, or they were thoughtful answers. I got asked a couple times to come up into a booth after I'd finished playing a particular tournament or was close to the lead. Would just, spend a little time with us. But the break I got, I guess, for doing TV much later in 2007, I had been lucky enough to have been asked to do some renovation on the TPC at Boston up in Norton with an architect that was becoming pretty well known named Gil Hance. And I had a knee surgery. I had some knee problems in the mid 2000s. And I had, I think, my second ACL reconstruction. I had all kinds of stuff going on, but I was definitely in a cast. And the producer at NBC Sports had asked me if I wanted to come up on Saturday, which back then was a second round because it was a Monday finish for that tournament. Asked me if I wanted to just come up and talk about the renovations on the course and sit next to Johnny Miller and Dan Hicks. And this was FedEx Cup. This was a big audience. It was a weekend. I was very involved with Seth Waugh, who was a Deutsche Bank CEO, and kind of a co-host of the tournament. Well, I sat up there for a segment, which was, about 12 minutes long. And he says, "Hey, do you want to stay another segment? Do you want to stay?" So I stayed there for a couple hours.
Wow.
Which was unexpected, but enjoyable. Because not only they asked me about the golf, they asked me about some of the players. And I got a little bit of a break from that. And then 2 years later, that was 2007. I think a year later, they asked me to see if I wanted to moonlight and do a Thursday, Friday at the Houston Open. And I did that. I ended up getting called to work for NBC in 2010, which was a pretty good timing because I was 49 that year. It was a transition sort of from playing PGA Tour to, did I want to do senior tour? And I was really looking at, look, I've played competitive golf here. I don't know if I want to play the senior tour full time. And it gave me the opportunity to get some exposure in a different light and still, be able to keep my brand up pretty good and work in a different way with the game. And I've been doing that, now for 10 years. It's hard to imagine that the media stuff that I've done, whether it's with NBC Golf Channel, Fox, PGA Tour Radio, and now with George Conley, just doing all kinds of stuff.
I mean, I don't mean to brag, but this may be your biggest media obligation yet.
Could be when we get all the views, right?
Exactly right. So transitioning away to this personal brand that you were bringing up, like you said, you now are the host of Just the Facts on Sirius XM. How's that experience been?
It's interesting. I've been doing it almost 2 years now. I just have a Monday show. It's an hour. Mondays are good days to talk about golf because there's always the previous weekend of golf to talk about. When I started doing this, I thought it would help my television. I thought it would be something that would be really good to just be able to enunciate your thoughts, come up with different ideas, good guests. I felt like I had enough experience that I could get some good people involved with the game on the show. I still felt like because I was competing, I could call different players they wouldn't run away from me when I asked them to come be on the show, because sometimes it's hard to get people to do this. And I think it's been well received. It's hard on PGA Tour radio to know how many people are actually listening to you. There's no Nielsen rating for that. And then the other thing I think that's hurt since the pandemic, people haven't been driving and commuting as much. So most of the time people would listen to that in their cars. My 4 o'clock slot is a good commuter time, right? Where people tend to be in their cars. So I think Sirius overall knows that less people are driving across the country, around the country, but now they promote more doing stuff on the app where you can listen to it more than just live too.
And you yourself have been also making some content digitally. You've got a YouTube channel and Instagram that you're both active on. So that's another journey that you're taking media-wise.
Yeah, I'm learning late in my life that some of these things are good and some are really not so good. But I hired a woman down here that's helps me with social media. She does a lot of different golfers. She actually does my wife's real estate. And I wouldn't know how to do half this stuff. But I've grown the viewership from that. There's been some engagement in a positive way. My sponsors, Titleist, has liked it a lot. FootJoy, Scotty Cameron, but they seem to be impressed by a blast motion. So yeah, it's been helpful that way. Some of it's entertaining. You got to have pretty thick skin because you always get some meathead that says something about you that you don't like. But I don't know. I take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt.
Sure. And for anyone who is interested in those platforms, the YouTube is Brad Faxon, Instagram is bfaxon. Now, Brad, another thing that we spoke about before starting recording was coaching, and that's something that you've been active on. Obviously, in terms of putting, you're known to be one of the best. So, what has your experience been like on the tour and LPGA tour, helping players out with those mentoring?
Yes, it's something that I would say I've spent a lot of time, when I was a player, talking about instruction with whether it was other instructors or other players, just about, what can work, what maybe wouldn't work, how do you communicate it. I liked looking at video, and so it was kind of in my blood. And then I was doing favors for a lot of people where I was like, yeah, I'll come watch you hit a few, or we'll talk about it. And, before Rory McIlroy, I had helped, some good players, Justin Thomas and Gary Woodland, but I wasn't like hanging a shingle out where I was available for that. It was more like, because I was still competing, I had this kind of idea that I never wanted to charge somebody that I was playing against. I thought that was a conflict of interest. And so once I turned 50, I didn't feel badly helping PGA Tour players, but the guys that I was playing against, I said, it doesn't make sense to charge a guy that I'm playing against. It just doesn't seem right. And then when McIlroy called me almost 3 years ago, and then we had lightning strike right away. He won, the first tournament that he played in afterwards. And look, I think the coaching part of this is funny because I don't hit any of the shots for the player, right? They still have to do it. They still have to make the putts. So the coach gets a lot of credit and a lot of blame, maybe too much credit and too much blame. But I love helping people. I think everybody kind of likes to help somebody out there. And I came at it from a player's perspective. I think a lot of instructors that got into teaching everybody starts out this game not to become a great teacher. They start this game out to become a great player.
Sure.
And then a lot of times these players will teach what they did that didn't work. You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, so they have all these ideas on how to play, and they played themselves off the tour, and then they go on this, journey to try and learn all these different things that they could have done to play better. And I'm like, boy, I don't know if that's always the way it is, but I know what it's like to be out there under the gun with pressure on you to make a putt, whether it's to win your first tournament or to make a cut or to, win or lose the Ryder Cup. I've done that. I know what it feels like. And I know what's too much to think about sometimes, but I also don't know. I mean, the teachers of today, they don't want you to guess when you're teaching. The student wants you to be able to measure. And how do you use all these technologies to have a base or a knowledge that you can help somebody without giving them too much information. It's just such there's no one person everybody's so different. But I've had some nice success with a few of the players I've worked with, whether it's PGA Tour or LPGA Tour. But like I said, right when we started the show, I just saw two of the guys that I've been helping struggled and shot 80 today. And I'm like, oh. And, I'm not out on the tour. I haven't been out on the tour with these players during the pandemic. So I can't watch them play, which sometimes is really important for a coach. But I'm passionate about it. And it's harder to watch a player play than it is to play yourself. That's for sure.
I bet. Now, Brad, for context, this podcast is going to go up after the Masters, but I'm still curious to hear some of your thoughts on the Fall Masters, because Augusta is obviously a course you're well acquainted with. You played in it many a time. What are you looking at upcoming in this weekend at Augusta?
Well, for the first time, we're going to see a Masters being played in November versus April. It's been a really, really warm fall in Augusta. Especially anywhere in the Southeast, there's been tons of rain. The players that I know that have been there, the members and the professionals say it's soft. It's not as green as it normally is because the Bermuda grass is still there. It's usually ryegrass in April. Will that make it a benefit to the longer hitters? The greens are still perfect, everybody says. And it's always the first major of the year. Now it's the last major of the year. All the golfing world's talking about Bryson DeChambeau. Will he continue to be that focus? I mean, there's so many good storylines. What will happen with Rory McIlroy? He needs to win the Masters to complete the Grand Slam. He's been kind of under the radar this year. You've seen some players play fabulously like Justin Thomas and Dustin Johnson, but Dustin got positive tested a few weeks ago and hasn't been around or seen much. And you'll have a bunch of foreign players. Can somebody like Tommy Fleetwood win his first major? Can Justin Rose, who's a well-liked player, Adam Scott win? I just love the foreign contingency there. Everybody likes that part of it. Or is it going to be some of the young guns? Can Jordan Spieth find his game back? Will you see Matt Wolff or Victor Hovland, Joaquin Niemann, the Chilean? I mean, there's so many of these young players that are certainly good enough. Will we see DeChambeau just destroy everybody again? I think it's going to be low scoring. I think that this forecast is conducive to the ball stopping. I don't think the course can ever be too long for any of the players that are going to play well there. And I'm a horrible predictor of who's going to do well. Bubba Watson's a two-time champion. You haven't seen his name up there too often, but like Phil Mickelson, they can just pop up out of nowhere because they love a place and they play with so much emotion and so much imagination. I don't know. Are you going to ask me to pull somebody out of the hat, or are you going to let me off?
That is exactly what I was going to ask you. But you've prefaced saying that you're not a great predictor, but I think it's worth a shot.
Yeah. I was at the Medalist last week practicing before my senior tour event, and I saw Tiger hitting some balls on the range, and went up to say hello to him. Watched him hit 2 or 3 drives that were just seeds, just right down the middle, little tiny draw, confident swings. And I mean, could he do this? I mean, it would be highly unlikely because he hasn't played well when he's played. He hasn't looked like he's pain-free. But when I watch those last few swings, I'm like, if he drives it like this, nobody's going to beat him.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Jason Day's played well. He's had a bad back. Patrick Reed's the scrappiest guy around. Can he do it? Absolutely. Are we going to have a surprise winner like we did with Danny Willett? It's just a fun thing. And my heart is with Rory for a lot of reasons because we spent so much time together. I love the kid. I think he's as talented as anybody that's played the game since Tiger Woods played. And every year is more pressure, but he's got a chance to play in 2 Masters in 6 months. So I'm hoping that you're going to play this after the Masters, and I'm going to be able to say I picked Rory.
That'd be great. I think that'd be great for the sport. There's a lot of storylines to it, absolutely. But Rory completing that Grand Slam is definitely something that a lot of people would like to see. Well, Brad, thank you so much for hopping on. I appreciate it. It was great to learn more about everything that you've done in the sport and for the sport, without a doubt. So thank you so much for hopping on.
Oh my God, you're welcome, Jordan.
I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Brad, as I really enjoyed getting to learn more about his journey through golf. Once again, you can find Brad Faxon on Instagram at bfaxon and on YouTube under Brad Faxon Golf. I'd like to thank Brad once more for taking the time to speak with me, and I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Scratch Stories. If you like the show, leaving a rating on Apple Podcasts, the website, or the app is a huge help for this show's growth. And if you'd like to reach me personally, you can always send me a message on any of the Scratch Golf Tips social media pages, or you can send me an email at scratchgolftips@mail.com. Thanks again for tuning in. Play well and take care.